Health craziness in Canada, Canadian healthcare. Perhaps one of the first significant discoveries in Canada. I learned that my health was on the decline. It was an unexpected discovery during an immigration to Canada standard health check screening that my blood sugar level was very unhealthily high, something like a 14 or something. I cannot recall the specific blood sugar reading number, but apparently it was high enough that untreated, I would be precluded from immigrating and remaining in Canada due to my eventual cost on the Canadian medical system. Although it proved a non-blocking health issue for Canada, their initial screening was surprising, and it was accurate at predicting my health issues in the future. I would eventually develop neuropathy beyond escalating migraines and a litany of smaller health issues. And then the big one, a heart attack. As an aside, 2 decades later, I was diagnosed with mixed dementia with probable frontotemporal lobe FTD dementia degeneration and/or Lewy body disease. They did not know what was wrong with me, but I had neurodegeneration. And then they eventually just generalized maybe I had early Alzheimer's. The list of issues far outpaced the initial unmanaged diabetes type 2. Indeed, it may not have been precisely what the high blood sugar reading was interpreted to mean, but its general prognostication about my medical and health industry costs was surprisingly accurate. Ultimately, though, Canadian healthcare paid for my heart attack that I had and its surgery, my time in intensive care unit ICU, and everything involved except for the ambulance transport, which is apparently excluded from Canadian medicine and healthcare. They will treat you as long as you can get to the doctor or hospital. It seemed absurd that the hospital call was not included, though any treatment they administered was. It was also a curious law that emergency responders, such as the ambulance medics, they are not allowed to leave a patient until another doctor or medical facility formally admits them. Consequently, when I arrived at the hospital, the 2 ambulance medics stayed with me for hours, administering oxygen and monitoring my vitals, while the overbusy hospital prioritized closer to death patients. It was my first glimpse into Canadian emergency medical care. They were understaffed, but those they had did seem quite capable. In fact, I had angioplasty, heart surgery, and it was swift and efficient, even if scary and wild. We'll more discuss that later. On another point about the shortcomings in Canadian healthcare, it excludes all medications that are considered not life-saving. In other words, every life-saving prevention medication is excluded, even if it is critical to managing life-threatening health conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and so forth. Even after a heart attack, medications related to my heart were excluded. Consequently, employers provided supplemental health insurance to cover medications. And so there it was. If you were employed in Canada, you should still get private insurance for medications and to pay for emergency transport to healthcare and to be entitled to pay extremely high taxes for that emergency-centric healthcare should you need it, even if it was limited in what they supported. Like I said, Canadian healthcare covered virtually every cost related to my heart attack, and its treatment, its surgery, and my recovery. But it is worth noting my excellent medical care was after nearly 6 months of having my complaints that I seemed to be having some kind of heart problems, and I was losing energy when I exerted myself, and my left arm up to my lower left jaw sometimes would get numb. Even my underarm would feel completely numb. Well, doctors all discounted my complaints as imagination, and potentially hypochondriac. But I was right, and they were wrong. I did suffer a heart attack, and the diagnosing doctor said that I would likely die within 1 day, maybe 2, had I not been to the hospital and undergone surgery. So Canadian healthcare is great once you suffer a catastrophic incident, but it sucks at prevention and diagnosis. Perhaps the most egregious tale I saw firsthand was an engineer colleague whose wife suffered severe migraines and went years with doctors insisting that she was too young to have any serious issues, and she was simply suffering severe headaches. Eventually, her symptoms were undeniably destroying her eyesight and mobility beyond relentless, agonizing pain that she was enduring. And of course, they said she was exaggerating, perhaps to get attention. Her doctors seemed heartless to her suffering. Much like my heart problems were discounted, so were my friend's wife's laments. And like my eventual collision with an untreated calamitous health condition, so did his wife collide with her health calamity. Narrowly able to function, she was finally admitted for an MRI. She had previously been unapproved for an MRI or any treatment because of her young age and the demographic and lack of head trauma. It all did not support brain disease or issues. It was too low of a probability to expend the money. The MRI revealed a highly advanced, untreatable brain tumor. She died within that year. Scott, her husband, was devastated, and there was nothing that he or anyone could do. He lamented that if he had taken her to the States, the USA, to seek an MRI and treatment despite their limited money, perhaps she would be alive. It was actually illegal to seek treatment outside the Canadian healthcare system as well. And they would have to spend their precious savings and break the law without yet knowing if there would have been a benefit. Even so, Scott wondered, did he let her die because he complied with the Canadian healthcare system? My heart bled for Scott, for he and his wife suffered years, with the culmination being death and loss. He said the tumor may have been treatable early on, but by the time it was detected, it was too late. It had grown too far and too big. And yet Scott and his wife knew long earlier the signs of his wife's decline and impending demise. And like me and my heart warnings, so were her signs ignored. From Canada determining my tax dollars and job creation value, and consequently tax dollars versus potential healthcare costs, showed me directly that Canadian healthcare and its government views people as tools of income that cost money to keep operating. That was it. I was a tool in Canada, and so long as I added more value than I might cost down the road, then I would be allowed to reside and work in Canada. Should I no longer add value, get the F out, GTFO. The bottom line, Canadian healthcare was a business. It was all about the numbers. Everyone in America praises Canadian healthcare as universally available to everyone. Well, I learned that is not true. Canadian healthcare is only available to people who cannot work due to disabilities or who are unemployed through no fault of their own. That must be interpreted as, well, you did not resign and you've only recently been laid off. So if you do not work out of choice, no health care for you. That may not seem unreasonable, but it is effectively the same thing in America. If you work for a company, most companies offer you health care, albeit at an income contribution to cover some of those costs. Well, Canada charges a lot for its healthcare contribution too. After all, my effective tax rate after income and sales and property tax was 55%. So anyone that would allege Canadian healthcare is awesome and free and how all other countries should behave like Canada, well, they have not lived in Canada and experienced its medical care firsthand. They are victims of propaganda. As an actively employed, high-tax paying worker in Canada, I was entitled to my Canadian healthcare. During a visit to a doctor about a seemingly unhealing little wound on my nose near my left eye socket, he concluded that I needed to see a surgeon to have it removed and biopsied to ensure it was not cancerous. The doctor believed it very well might be cancerous. In fact, the doctor said that maybe he should cut it out right then and there to prevent growth if it was cancerous. Instead, though, with a potentially life-threatening diagnosis, I was fast-tracked to a surgeon in the local university medical program, where an instructor would do the surgery. In Canada, it is the qualifications of the doctor, not where they work, that permits them to perform surgery. He removed the tissue all around the unhealing wound and stitched it up. He did the same for an unusually large skin tag that was on my neck. I learned eventually that the nose unhealing wound was a basal cell carcinoma cancer, and the neck skin tag was apparently just a big skin tag. The doctor explained the basal cell carcinoma could lead to eventual death, though it was not guaranteed when I would die. People at work saw the facial stitches and imagined that I must have come out of a bar fight with a few injuries that needed to be stitched up. Well, I joked and went along with the narrative, outside with closer friends and colleagues whom I disclosed the actual tale. One hot summer day, Electronic Arts in Burnaby, Canada, held a company-wide outside picnic event with all sorts of festivities like those dunk tanks I talked about, but now sack races, hoop throws, and so on. Executives were asked to sit in the dunk tank as targets for employees to take out their frustrations on their bosses, and so on. It was all in good fun. Like I said earlier, I was one of the dunk tank volunteers. And unfortunately, also like I said, while standing in line, I was knocked unconscious. But there's another point here. While the company emergency medical staff was tending to me, they merely filed a report that I was knocked unconscious. And later, Canadian Healthcare asked if I was okay. And that was it. I guess I was okay. No CT scan, no MRI, nothing but a hand touch of my massive red swollen head and a cold compress added with head bandages. Did not seem like much in the way of prevention. That's my point here. I had felt repeatedly that American and Canadian healthcare was not great. Of course, there is none better anywhere in the world that I know of, I must confess. So, in the pools of poor healthcare, Canadian and American healthcare, they're okay. Again, much like Scott's wife's brain tumor and my heart attack symptoms being ignored, I was ignored again. I have always been vulnerable to influenzas, ever since a near-death experience with scarlet fever, aka severe, life-threatening strep throat that kills, often toddlers. And so, whenever I contracted a flu, it would often spiral to 103 to 105 degree fevers, and it would leave me congested with immense breathing problems. I knew to take flus seriously. So, when I went to the medical clinic to seek treatment, it was disheartening to be told, just go take some cold medicine and some cough drops and get over it. My fever became so high at around 106 degrees, I could barely breathe. I became convinced that death was a very real possibility. My wife took me to the hospital where they insisted I was overreacting to a severe flu. Well, it turned out my supervisor at work had contracted H1N1 swine flu as a virus, and he gave it to me. Others in the area also caught the virus, and they died. Only because I overreacted did I get the treatment in the hospital early enough to save my life. As before, Canadian healthcare handles actual care okay, but does a terrible, bad job at diagnosis and prevention, or for follow-up care or medications. For several months, I found my heart felt weird, with gurgling and bubbling feelings sometimes inside. But it was only after the exertion, like walking up a hill or a flight of stairs, that I felt it strong. Eventually, it sort of hurt and made my left arm numb. I would have to sit and rest for 5 to 15 minutes, and eventually it would go away, and then I could resume my activity. Things became too frequent though, and I had gone to a Canadian medical clinic since it was same day to see the doctor. And I asked about my heart and other possible causes of my problems. But the doctor was dismissive, and he sent me away as a hypochondriac. This persisted, and so I went to another doctor, a general practitioner, a GP. This woman said it was unlikely anything to worry about, and come back if things got worse. Well, they did get worse. On several occasions, I experienced very strong, unrelenting pressure and pain in my back. Nothing would relieve it. I would lay on my back and flop around in an effort to escape the torment. Again, nothing worked. Time passed slowly as I would lay on my back writhing. Eventually, the suffering stopped, and I could resume normal life, albeit worried about my health after several such incident attacks. I returned to the GP doctor. This time she gave me a referral to a cardiologist to have an echo stress cardiogram done to rule out any heart conditions once and for all. She did not believe I had any such problem still, but at least she agreed now to move me to the next level of healthcare. Clearly, no doctor thought that I had anything to worry about because the appointment was almost 6 months away. Well, at least I did have a cardiologist appointment now. Canada does not have free healthcare like people say. After you pay crazy high taxes and if you work, you do have access to healthcare, excluding medications and certain procedures. They also do not pay for emergency transport, ambulances, etc. And they discourage and block people that need treatment until the last possible moment, which results in further health problems, progressing, and even death. Canadian medicine is different, but it is not better than the United States medicine. It is cheaper on the surface, but it is actually much more expensive when you consider total taxes paid in America versus Canada. I would not choose to return or live in Canada, but it was invaluable for my life's journey and my career to have been in Canada.